That's Attorney General Bill Barr walking into the White House today, not long after telling the AP the Justice Department has not seen fraud on a scale that could have changed the outcome of the presidential race. With that, Barr is blowing a big hole in the baseless case the president's trying to make to undermine the election. Especially significant since Barr is one of the most loyal cabinet members. He's also batting down a convoluted conspiracy once floated by Team Trump about election software switching votes, saying DHS and DOJ have looked into that, and so far, we haven't seen anything to substantiate it. Still, the president's campaign attorneys are clinging to their claims, with Rudy Giuliani responding with the greatest respect to the attorney general. His opinion appears to be without any knowledge or investigation of evidence of systemic fraud. Barr says there's none so far, as some in the president's base turn on the AG already. It's not only the administration's own Justice Department, but state leaders in the president's own party acknowledging the system worked, as President Trump now picks fights with GOP governors in states he lost. In Arizona, a tweet storm from Governor Doug Ducey defends the certification of Joe Biden as the winner there, after the president accused Ducey of rushing to put a Democrat in office. And President Trump's keeping up his attacks on Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, saying he allowed his state to be scammed. A top Republican there fed up with escalating rhetoric, including death threats against elections officials.
This has to stop. We need you to step up, and if you're going to take a position of leadership, show some.
Hallie Jackson, NBC News, the White House.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.